Hello 3D printing friends. Today we are going to be putting together the Alien3D Drift Cycle. This is the project from the August Alien 3D UFO Mystery Box. Stick around, I'll show you how it goes together. I'm Brian and you are watching BV3D. So today we are putting together the Alien3D Drift Cycle. This one obviously is already assembled. This is the one that I had put together to test some modifications that I had made to it. There was a problem with the gearing on the original one that caused it to not be able to spin the rear wheel. I made some modifications. I gave those back to Josh at Alien3D so that he could send them out to everybody or make them available to everybody. So after I got that working, I put a quick video up on Twitter and it seemed to be fairly popular. I showed that to a coworker of mine and she wanted to know if I would print one of these for her son's birthday that's coming up. Apparently he likes all things drifting. So I told her I would, and that's the one that we'll be putting together today. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's get started with the gearbox. The gearbox starts on the left side, and that's going to consist of 2 gears and a small spacer. And the way these go on is this. You'll notice there is a higher part here than here. So the first gear goes on here. The second gear overlaps it like this. And finally, the little spacer goes on here so that these are even across here. There's a small gearbox cover that really just holds the gears in place, but it also holds the motor. And that can snap into place for test fitting. We're going to take that off for now. Usually get a pretty good snap on there, so I'll use a screwdriver to pry that up gently just a little bit. Now before we do any permanent installation of these gears, we're going to have to lubricate these pins. And before we do that, you're going to need to make sure that when you put the gears on, that they spin freely. And so that may mean that you need to sand these down to make them smooth, and or use a round file to file out the insides of the gears a little bit so that you can get them sitting smoothly and rolling smoothly. Because you want them to be able to spin easily. If they don't spin easily, you're going to have problems. For lubricating these, I recommend something like Super Lube. And this is just a synthetic grease, and I use this for working on my printers. Whenever something needs a little lubrication, this is what I use. I'm just going to use the end of a zip tie to scoop some of this out and apply it to these pins. You don't need a whole lot, but you need enough. Then you can put the gears back on. And I kind of spin them a little bit and move them up and down to kind of spread that grease a little bit, so that these have a better chance of not binding up later. I'm going to add a little bit of this little spacer. All right. That's looking good. There's also a little pinion gear that goes on the motor. I've already gone ahead and pressed this on. It's a fairly snug fit If your fit is a little bit loose, you can add a drop of super glue to it. The exact placement along the shaft of the motor isn't super critical, because you can adjust the height that the gear sits at simply by adjusting where the motor sits in the holder. So I'm going to go ahead and snap this on. Let's see if we need to do anything with that. And it looks like we've got that at a good height right now. If we needed to make it a little lower, we can push the motor further down into its holder. And so now it's sticking down further. And if we need to bring it up, we can bring it up. I still haven't glued this part on yet. And I may not. It's got a good enough snap fit that it may just stay like that. For testing, I'm going to go ahead and connect the battery to the battery clip. And I'm just going to hold the wires on the terminals on the motor. This is loud, so hold on to your ears. And that seems to be working fine. If you don't lubricate these pins, you're going to have a problem, because the gears will spin so fast that they'll start to heat the plastic up and it will all melt together. And then you'll have to reprint gears and a side piece, and that would be no fun. Next things that we're going to need to put on here are the axles. And now there are these axle pins that come up through the center holes. Axles that will get glued onto them. Then we have the rear wheel. I printed this by doing a color change once I got to the edge of the wheel and it started printing the gear, just because I thought it would look nice to have the gear silver and the wheel black. But that just sits right on there. And you need to make sure that those gears engage, which means that you're going to have to make sure that you keep, this has a little bit of play in it and it can slide forward. So all of that's going to have to stay at whatever height is necessary to keep those gears engaged. You don't want them to slip, but you also don't want them too tight, so you kind of have to play with it a little bit and see how you want it to be. If I hook the battery back up, we can get some spinning on the wheel here. For glue, I'm going to use a medium thickness super glue. And generally what I'm going to want to do is put that right around here. Let me zoom in a little before I do that. I'm going to need a glob of it right here. I'm going to kind of put globs all around. I'm going to keep that held in place with the spacing where I need it until that cures, or at least until it sets and has a good hold. The front axle is a little less critical about this. In fact, it's not really critical about it at all, but we're going to follow the same procedure. Let's go ahead and get the other axle pins on. Make sure you use the correct side of the vehicle. This is the outside. It matches the outline of the other. And again, our little drops of super glue. And I'll hold these in place until the super glue sets up. Let's install the axles. I'm putting some super glue around the edge of the axle and also on the axle pin. And for this rear one, we need to make sure that we keep that lined up for the gearing. The front axle pin is not so picky. And we've got our roof that we need to put on, because the roof goes here. Oh, and before we put that roof on, when we put the rear wheel on the other side of the wheel, there is a spacer, and that just sits right there. Front wheel goes here, and let's go ahead and get some super glue along the edge of this. We will let that sit for a little bit to dry. That completes the plastic assembly. The next thing that we need to do after this sets up is we need to install the switch and do a little bit of soldering to get the battery and the switch connected to the motor. So we'll come back and do that in just a bit. Okay, we are back. It is now time to work on the electrical part of the drift cycle, and that essentially consists of connecting the battery clip to the motor and to the push button on-off switch. We really only need the cable from the battery clip, at least for the ground wire, the black one, to be about 3.5 inches long, so we'll measure that. We'll measure that to about 3.5 inches and trim that off. I'm going to strip the end of that so that we can get to the wire inside the insulation. Usually that works better for me. There. We'll take this over to the soldering station in just a minute. The longer side of this is going to go over to the switch. And then the other side of the piece that we trimmed off is going to go from the switch back to the motor. So we'll strip that insulation off of this one as well. And we will work on that in just a second. So one thing that we need to determine is the polarity of the motor. So we need to figure out which of these two terminals down in here, zoom in, which of the terminals in here the red wire goes to and which one the black wire goes to. So just for fun, I will put the black wire, actually I'm going to connect the battery to this first. I'm going to connect the black wire, that terminal down there, and touch the red wire to this terminal just to see which way it goes. And it looks like it was going backwards. Let me check that again. Get in there. Come on. All right, wire. Do what I want you to do. There. Touch. Let me feel that. Yeah, that's going backwards. So what that tells me is the black terminal from the battery, or the black wire from the battery, needs to go on this terminal up here. And then the red goes to the switch, and then the other side of the wire from the switch goes to the other terminal. I'll show you that here. Let me zoom back out. And I don't know if you can tell the spin direction, but the rear wheel is spinning in the correct direction when we have it hooked up this way. All right. So that's what we need to remember. Black goes there. I think I will grab a Sharpie and put a little black dot there. And so of course now that I need a Sharpie, I can't find any of my Sharpies. I have a black pen. Maybe that'll work. There we go. Got myself a little black dot right here. So I know that's where the black wire goes. Now, because I didn't glue this in, I can pop it back out. There we go. Let's go ahead and get the switch installed. Oh, sorry. There is a retaining nut on the switch. Let's remove that. Put the switch down through the hole, and then screw that nut in place. There we go. Because we're going to need to solder onto that anyway. Let's get the soldering iron turned on. Get some wires set up. So one side of the red terminal is going to go to one side of the switch. And then we had cut off a black piece, and the black piece is going to come from the other side of the switch and go to the motor. I'm not going to hook that up yet because I don't want to get confused about which black lead goes here. So it looks like the soldering iron is just about heated up. So let's start where I've got my black mark. Get a blob of solder on the iron. Use that to solder that wire in place. Now we're not going to put the other one directly on. If we do, the motor runs. We don't want that yet. What we do want is the other wire
that we had cut off of this black lead. All right, that will go there. So I will solder that on now. Now, when we have the switch hooked up, that's when the motor will turn or not turn, when these two complete the circuit. Perfect. Now it's time to get this stuff tied in to the switch. And because we've already got this stuff on the motor, we can go ahead and snap this piece back on. All right. So now this goes to the motor and this goes to the motor. I'm sorry, goes to the switch. Those both go to the switch. Pardon me. So now, probably ought to put a little bit of a twist in this just to keep things together. And we have enough slack on here that we can mount our battery up here. And that's what I like to do, is just make sure the switch is off, put the battery up here. And I just use some double-sided foam tape to stick it on. And just make sure that you keep your wires clear of the gears, and then when you press the button, it does its thing. Let me get my double-sided tape and I'll put that on there. Okay. Let's get a little bit of this stuff. I'm going to put that on the battery. And then peel the backing off of the other side, because it's double-sided. And we'll just stick this right on the top. And that completes the installation. If you want to neaten this stuff up, you probably can. I would use maybe a zip tie or something in there. I'll take care of that a little later. I'm kind of anxious to get this going. Let's take this out to the garage.
That was a successful test run of the drift cycle that will be given as a birthday gift to my coworker's son. I printed this in proto-pasta's Candy Apple Red PLA, in MG Chemicals Black PETG, and in the Prusa Silver that came with my i3 Mark III. I printed the parts on my i3 Mark III and on my Monoprice Maker Select Plus. I was happy with the result from both printers, and I'm happy with the way the project went together. If you haven't printed this out, I do recommend that you try it. The link is in the description below. There's also information about the UFO boxes if you're interested in subscribing. Well, now we're at the end of the video, and this is the part where I say things like, subscribe, and share, because those things help the channel. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down, but either way, leave a comment and let me know what you like or didn't like. If you haven't subscribed already, you can do so by clicking the BV3D icon right over here, and over here is a video that YouTube thinks you might enjoy. That's about it for the video today. I'm going to go print something cool. You go print something cool too. See you next time.